Hello, I am Jordana Agus, a student in our Economic of Public Policies course here at Northwood University, and I would love to talk to you today about our environmental policies. Currently in the United States, our policies are implemented by use of our federal, state, and local governments, as these regulations aim to help ensure a standard for numerous resources such as air and water quality, as well as try and combat climate change and even aid in the conservation of our natural resources. I'd like to take a look at our current public policies as well as what potentially our future could hold. As first implemented in 1963, we have the Clean Air Act that was signed into place by President Lyndon B. Johnson. As this federal law was put into place as it helps regulate the air emissions on both stationary and mobile sources. This act helped authorize the Environmental Protection Agency to establish the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, NAAQS. This was to help promote and protect public health as well as uphold a clean environment. There were many pros and cons that were found within this act as well. As the Clean Air Act did help significantly reduce many hazardous air pollutants as well as achieve their goal of improving overall public health and quality of our environment. It even bred innovation in the world of public control methods used. But with these procedures in place, there were claims of how this new Clean Air Act had negatively impacted businesses financially. As this limited minor economic growth, the implementation of these protocols slowed as well. The primary goal was to have NAAQS in all 50 states by 1975, as stated on EPA.gov, but by 1990 the act was amended as there were many areas of the country failing to meet the deadline initially set. More so as the years progressed, concerns grew for the updated calls to deal with emerging new pollutants in our market. Then, in 1972, the Clean Water Act was passed by Congress, as this was just 2 years after our very first Earth Day took place, its main goal being to act to eliminate pollutant sources on our waterways. To try and maintain the chemical and biological integrity of our waters, this act implemented a permit system as well as a quality standard that needed to be met and upheld. Just like the Clean Air Act, there was both pros and cons met with this act implemented. As there was huge strides made to fight and promote and improve water quality in the United States, as well as helping to maintain the aquatic ecosystems that inhabit those waterways. Unfortunately, businesses, corporations, and even local governments found the overly complex framework of this act to be quite a burden. Because of this, implementation slowed as well. While they had already accomplished great steps towards cleaner water, unfortunately the efforts in this act dwindled a bit, so we definitely need to keep the momentum up and aim towards clean waterways. Up next, we had the Endangered Species Act that was implemented as this strides towards the conservation of the threatened and endangered species of both plants and animals, as well as to conserve the habitats as well as its inhabitants, being that main goal of our Endangered Species Act. It was administered by the United States Fish and Wildlife Services as well as the National Marine Fisheries Service. With its mission being to prevent the harm and further loss of endangered species, this act brought nations together to enter into agreements to preserve the habitats within each of the threatened and endangered species' lives. While they did have their hand in preventing the extinction of numerous species, there are raising concerns from developers and even local landowners as they believe the ESA is too restrictive as it infringes on their ability to use their land and maximize abilities. These policies were unlike anything seen before, as the Clean Air Act was in fact the first policy put into place in regards to environment back in 1963. The individuals on the winning side of this argument would be the general public, who greatly benefit from the better quality of air and water each and every day, but I would argue that the environment is probably the real winner here, as most of the benefits are to better the earth around us and ensure the longevity of our planet as well as all who inhabit it. As discussed earlier, these policies are not just things that were put into place and everything happened to be magically fixed. As yes, over the years with these tools, we have seen huge benefits to the issues we are facing with our environment, but there is still a long way to go. Amendments have been made since the initial implementation of each of these policies, as in 1970 we saw the establishment of the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA. In 1977, we introduced the Prevention of Significant Deterioration Program, And even, like I mentioned, in 1990, amendments were made to the Clean Water Act as NAAQS was unable to be implemented into all 50 states by that initial deadline. We see the quote-unquote losers of this deal being the fossil fuel industries who produce and distribute coal, crude oil, and gas as they face stricter regulations, ultimately leading to an increase in cost of production as well as a lean towards renewable resources and greener energy sources as opposed to these crude oils. In recent events, we see that the fossil fuel industries might just be in luck, though, as just this past November, Donald Trump was elected as president, and his platform advertised certain policies regarding the environment that are a call for concern. His stance is to prioritize economic growth over environmental protections, and while both of these topics are very, very important in the current state of our country, it is imperative that we don't lose sight of the fact that both, not just one, of these policies are important. In President Trump's first election, we saw him remove federal climate initiatives, as well as trying to roll back more than 125 environmental protections on things such as the lessening of requirements for large factories that leak waste into our waterways, as well as approval on seismic drilling on protected land. This has not happened yet, but as we speak, there are talks of him gaining the ability to tap the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, which is said to potentially hold more than 10 billion barrels of crude oil. To better understand how these policies affect our public, we want to take a look at the 7 economic principles and how they relate to our environmental policies. The first principle, that free people are not equal and equal people are not free, can be better understood through looking at our country's market dynamics, social equity, and along with the analyzing of our regulatory framework, as we can better understand how these policies pertain to this specific economic principle. As discussed earlier, the policies in place now aim to maintain our natural resources and to reduce, if not eliminate, pollution. With these policies such as the Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act, they aim to provide a better quality for all, and they may infringe on people's free will, but their freedoms becoming limited when met with regulations and constraints they must adhere to. With freedom comes diversity, and that in itself breeds inequality. When each and every person has the choice to diversify themselves from the rest, whether it be with their jobs, their clothes, or with any aspect of their life, it becomes apparent that inequalities will arise. Differences in occupations offer different salary levels, and so on and so forth. When stipulations are put into place board-wide and everyone becomes affected by the same thing, it limits their freedoms as they are now forced to comply with something that they might not have otherwise chosen. While it does provide a negative about the implementation of our environmental policies, it does also play hand in hand with this economic principle. On to our second economic principle of what belongs to you, you tend to take care of, and what belongs to no one or everyone tends to fall into disrepair. When relating to this economic principle, we often look to the concept of the tragedy of the commons. This concept was brought to light primarily through the lens of ecologist Garrett Hardin back in 1968, and with this we see that the reason people are more inclined to take care of their own property is because they themselves are the ones who benefit from the upkeep. It describes individuals acting in accordance to their own self-interests, as these behaviors could potentially lead to an overuse of resources, which could result in long-term consequences. We are already seeing this come into play today. I'll use the celebrity Taylor Swift as an example, as she reportedly was the celebrity who had put out the highest CO2 emissions from flying, with around 8,300 tons of carbon emissions in 2022 alone. She has gone out to claim that it really isn't that bad because she had also allowed other A-list celebrities to use her jet, and it wasn't just her putting out those CO2 emissions. And as an adult who is very well off, the effects of climate change might not be the scariest thing in the minds of these celebrities, but it is in fact the lowest income groups of our society that are affected the most by climate change. And as we see, this policy does come into play with our environmental efforts, as the environment is something that I would argue belongs to all of us instead of no one, and we would all benefit from cleaner air and greener parks. We just need to find a way to make the masses understand the greater benefits if we all collectively work together to protect our planet. With policy 3, a sound policy requires that we consider the long-run effects and all people, and not simply the short-run effects and few people, go hand in hand with the topics I was just discussing, as a lot of the United States environmental policies are made with this very principle in mind. Thinking about and planning for the long-run effects is definitely at the forefront of the minds of the individuals who are crafting these policies and are implementing them with the very purpose of protecting the long-run health of our planet. This principle plays a crucial role in the making of these policies, since the issues in our environment faces such as deterioration of the natural habitats of our wildlife, or even the overarching issue of climate change. There are long-run problems that we watch unfold and progressively worsen over broad spans of time. And with a long-term scope of things being used when making our environmental policies, we see this principle firsthand. Principle 4 is, if you encourage something, you get more of it, and if you discourage something, you get less of it. When looking at how this policy applies to the aspects of our environmental policies, we can look at how incentives are used and established for the benefit of the masses. This principle plays a huge role in not just policy making, but most aspects of economics and how we see individuals alter their behaviors based on incentives or disincentives. We see that when people implement solar panels or other renewable resources, our government offers tax credits to help encourage this behavior in businesses. These incentives put in place help the push for more people to lean towards greener energy practices. And on the flip side, we see carbon taxes and cap and trade systems used to discourage the use of fossil fuels as well as limit carbon emissions within businesses. On to our 5th economic principle of no one spends somebody else's money as carefully as he spends his own, is a great one to look at, as with each environmental program, it is often being paid for with taxpayer money, as we can see a differing in opinions from the public on how they want their money spent. With this economic principle in mind, we can draw the conclusion that the money will not be allocated as efficiently as if these people were directly donating to the cause they support while managing their own money. When looking through both public and private sectors, such as our government, versus the private entities that prioritize revenue and seeking returns on their investments. When a private organization backs a green initiative, that is because that they would like to do the right thing by the environment, but also because they see potential gains from taking that initiative. The government is not looking specifically for that gain on investment, and so we can see a less efficient way of spending that might not be the most beneficial in the long run. And while you may believe that the difference in this efficient spending is a case against the government implementing policies, the results we have seen already speak for themselves, as the overall benefits that are seen justify the cost that might be incurred through these processes. On to our 6th principle, that the government has nothing to give anybody except what it first takes from somebody, and a government that's big enough to give you everything that you want is big enough to take away everything you've got. This notion follows the narrative that anytime our government would be giving is actually being taken from somewhere else. When looking at the Clean Air Act, yes, it does bring cleaner air and greener environments to the masses, but it also takes. These takes come in the form of regulations and inferred compliance costs of the implementation of these greener methods within businesses. So yes, this principle is applicable to the environmental policies we see today. But finally, our final economic principle would be that liberty makes all the difference in the world. In piggybacking off of our last principle, we can better understand how our environmental policies potentially infringe on our civil liberties, as with regulations and constraints put into place to monitor carbon emissions within businesses, there is less freedom when choosing their methods and potentially increase the costs that they wouldn't have otherwise had. With both the Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act put into place to limit pollutants and help protect and conserve natural resources, the mass majority complies and does their part, actively choosing to aid in the green movement. But there is a portion of our population that feels that they cannot conduct business the way that they would like to because of these policies. So the question is, are these policies worth the outcome that follow these forced practices? As we've seen the outcomes of all of the policies so far, I would argue that yes, they do outweigh the costs that you may otherwise infer, but in conclusion, it is my understanding that our country has been implementing different environmental policies, just like all of the ones I've illustrated earlier. These 7 economic principles can be related in many different sectors of our country's public policies, but after focusing on our environmental efforts, we see that sometimes government intervention would save the mass public from things such as acid rain. While there are arguments on both sides, I hope that we can see the importance of prioritizing our natural environments around us, as well to help preserve our country and our planet for generations to come. Thank you.